Okay, so we are being live streamed, so I'll just dive straight into it. Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of IPCIDE, I'm pleased to welcome you to the second webinar in our series on ethics and governance of AI. Through this series, we aim to advance critical conversations on AI governance, ethics, and responsible innovation, and as we prepare for developments in our AI policy landscape. Our aim through the series is to invite leading experts and researchers to share their work and perspectives and on a particular topic falling under the broader umbrella of AI ethics and governance. And we also invite distinguished discussants from India to reflect on the particular theme in the national context. And through this process, we try to engage people in conversation and exchange of ideas, and ensure that ethics and responsible development remain at the forefront of our AI landscape. So on today's webinar, we're going to focus on AI and sustainability. And our keynote speaker will be Dr. Friederike Rohde, who's a sociologist of technology and studies the interplay between technological and social dynamics of change. She is particularly interested in societal discourses and narratives surrounding the use of digital technologies, and her research focuses on the sustainability consequences of new technologies and the critical analysis of diverse expectations and visions. And one of her key focal points of her research, as we're going to talk about today, is AI and sustainability. We also have Professor Dr. Ayushi Srivastava joining us as discussant to talk about the Indian perspective of things. She is a lecturer and assistant dean of online programs at the Jindal School of Environment and Sustainability at OP Jindal Global University. So I won't take more of our speaker's time. And with that, I'll ask Dr. Rohde to begin her presentation, please.
Yeah, hello everyone. Good morning from my side, but good afternoon. Here in Berlin, it's 10 o'clock and it's below 0 degrees, so it's quite cold. But nevertheless, the sun is shining, so it's quite nice weather. So it's very nice to be here, and I'm very honored that I can talk to you today about this very important topic, which I have been working on the last, let's say, 4 to 5 years, which is the issue of sustainability and AI. Like, what does it mean to look at the AI and AI lifecycle from sustainability perspective? What are current challenges related to the sustainability of AI systems and also the related infrastructures? So that's a bit the theme I will talk to you today. Why is it important to look at AI from a sustainability perspective along the life cycle? I mean, as we can see, there are many, let's say, headlines about the impacts that AI leads to, like, for example, the water consumption, or like AI can do great things if it doesn't burn the planet, or like is generative AI climate disaster, or like energy demands are out of control. And about all those issues, we also want to talk today a little bit more in depth. And all these things have a certain background. I mean, why is it the case that about AI is talked in that way, or that there are so huge sustainability impacts of AI? The reason for is that although many of the things are sounding like a little bit like virtual, the cloud and everything, there are many materialities related to AI. For example, we have the chips, we have the data centers, we have cables under the sea. We need energy to run all those systems, and we also need resources in order to build the materials which we need. So, I mean, the whole system of AI, or to make it more precise, LLMs, large language models, to be able to run, they need infrastructures, and those infrastructures always come with a materiality, with resources that we need, with energy, with cables, with networks, and also all those things are consuming resources, and that's why this impact on the ecological level is also even more discussed at the moment. And what I also want to try to show is why it is important not only to look at ecological impacts, but also to look a little bit at like the entanglements between what does it mean to look at ecological aspects and social aspects, and also what does it mean to look at this topic from a more broad sustainability perspective. So we see that we're having all these materialities related to AI and AI infrastructures. And what I now want to focus a bit on is what are the impacts related to compute and data center expansion. You could also look at the whole life cycle, and we will also see later on that there are also many other impacts occurring when we're looking also at the upstream and downstream parts. But now I want to focus a little bit on this topic and like dive a little bit more deeper on into what are the impacts related to compute and data center expansion. Um, I think one thing which is often mentioned is the energy consumption for the training for large language models. There have been conducted several studies. I think one of the most or best known studies is from Sasha Lucioni, who's from Hugging Face, and her colleagues, and she tried to compare the power consumption and also the carbon emissions of different large language models. And there you can see that, for example, if you look at the model like GPT-3, what is the former model of what we now all know as ChatGPT. So it was a previous model on which this ChatGPT, which we know now, is built on. And when we sum it up and also look like at the carbon intensity of the grid, and also like the indicator for how efficiently the data center is using the energy, the power, it sums up to 552 tons CO2 equivalents. So it's quite a lot. And we also can see that when you, for example, compare the CO2 emissions of GPT-3 and the model which is shown in the green, like Bloom, that it can be a huge difference, although it has like nearly the same number of parameters. So the model has nearly the same size, you can say. And that can occur if you're using different energy sources. For example, the Bloom model, which was trained in mainly on nuclear energy, as Sasha Lucioni mentioned, then the CO2 emissions will also go down. And that is also obviously the case if you use, for example, renewable energy. But we will also come to this aspect later on. So what we are seeing at the moment is an overall increase of electricity consumption by data centers. So here you can see the numbers in terawatt hours. So it's really a huge amount of energy needed for these data centers. And at the moment, we are just observing that this energy demand is rising. And we also are observing a huge expansion of data centers. And that's also causing many environmental problems. Beyond the energy problems, there is also an issue about water. Um, and I think we will also learn more about this later when we look a little bit more at the in what the problems are in your country or if there are any conflicts arising in your country. And there's a current study which was conducted by a German research institution for Greenpeace, and they estimated the global water consumption of data centers. And here you can see it's not all about like AI, but there are also data centers which are mainly doing this compute for AI related processes. There you can see that the dark green parts of the column is AI specific data centers. So when we're looking at like the last year, 2024, it was like 239 billion liters globally, and it's estimated to rise up to 664 billion liters, what is like in three. I mean, it's a very huge increase. So and that's why affect by a factor of three. And I think that's also a development which we yeah have to take into consideration when we're talking about this topic. And what we also see, and I think we will also hear a little bit more about this later, that there's also growing resistance when it comes to data centers because of this water issue. There was recently published a case study, which is named Where the Cloud Meets Cements, and they're also showing like several case studies where there were conflicts about data centers, especially regarding to water usage. And the issue, like what I think is important to keep in mind behind this is that it's also like about distributive justice. So that where are the burdens, how are the burdens and benefits distributed, and that like those infrastructures are located in communities like which are, for example, economically disadvantaged or like that exacerbates inequalities like in very dry regions and it disadvantages um, uh, vulnerable groups. And there are many cases which you can look at, but it's not only the case, for example, in Latin America or in the global south. It's also, for example, conflicts are also arising, for example, in the US, where there are also many data centers. But the data centers there are also located in many dry regions, and there are also use conflicts. And when it comes to the cases which are examined in this report, there you can also see that there are many conflicts at the local level and also kind of resistance. Another issue which I think is also getting growing importance is the whole issue of the hardware. I mean, it's not only the fact that there's mining and all the mining related impacts, but also like if you look more at the downstream side, there's also the expectations that the e-waste will grow significantly due to AI. And the projection is that it will grow up to 43.2 megatons by 2030. And that's also, I mean, a huge number. And for this topic, I mean, it's also the question that, like, what is done with the e-waste, where it is disposed, and this also, again, raises questions of environmental justice and all those related issues. So to sum it up a bit, there are many environmental impacts related to AI and AI infrastructures, and these needs to be taken into account when we look at this topic. So how do we look at the topic of sustainability and AI? In our research, or I mean, I think in the discourse since, let's say, 2019 or 2020, it's important to make a bit this distinction that we have the debate on AI for sustainability, which means that we are applying machine learning tools in areas that could possibly support the climate development goals. Let's say, for example, AI for climate modeling or AI for the smart grid in the energy transition or for biodiversity. But what our perspective entails is more like the sustainability of AI, meaning the sustainable design of all AI systems along the life cycle, so that it's not only those technologies which are aimed at doing something good, let's say, for the climate or the environment, but it's also like all machine learning tools and applications. Because if you only look at the let's say AI for climate technologies, then it's only a very small part of all AI technologies that are currently in place and that we are currently using. So we also wanted to look a little bit more at this technology from a broader perspective, and also look at the whole and at the whole life cycle. So what we did, and this was a joint project together with the NGO Algorithm Watch, the Institute for Ecological Economy Research, and the Distributed Artificial Intelligence Laboratory at TU Berlin. And we developed sustainability criteria for AI systems and also published some magazines, which you can also have a look at if you're interested in this topic. Because there it's also not presented in a very, let's say, academic way, but also so that it's maybe a little bit more illustrated with cases and with interviews and everything. So if you're interested in this, feel free to have a look at those magazines. And we started with a definition of sustainability. So what does sustainability mean to us when we want to look at the AI life cycle? And we defined like the social dimension with ensuring basic needs and intergenerational justice, but also to refer to social cohesion, working and living conditions, but also like institutions and infrastructures. And we also tried to look at it a little bit from the, like, let's say, capability approach, so that people have the ability to live a life that they could choose for good reasons, and that do not question foundations of self-respect. The environmental definition we defined with the operation within the planetary boundary and the environmental limits. And the economic dimension, we try to put a bit like at like to be embedded into the social and economic dimension, so that economic decisions always have to be made with responsibility for the common good and the planet. So this was our basic definition of sustainability. And for developing the criteria, we mapped like certain discourses and like discussions about AI guidelines, discussions about green AI, and also like the raising discussion about the ecological impacts. And we also try to look a little bit at the economic aspects and developed certain criteria for this. So at the end, we came up with criteria for the social dimension, which are mainly referring, I would say, to the discourse of AI and ethics and guidelines and all those more societal risks that are related to AI. And these are, for example, transparency and accountability, non-discrimination and fairness, technical reliability and human oversight, self-determination, data protection. But we also looked a little bit at the, let's say, design practices, so that we should also have criteria like co-design and participatory design. And also issues like, or we said it's also important to look at the cultural appropriateness. So how is, like, for example, local knowledge used for developing AI systems and all those things. Then we have the economic dimension, where there was not much out there when we developed the criteria. So we really also had to look a little bit at the whole like political economy debate. And we developed the criteria market diversity and unlocking of innovation potential, so that it's also important that there is a diversity in markets, no monopolies. And obviously it's also about the working conditions and jobs, and also about distribution effects in target markets. So like which actors are able to participate in this whole AI market, and how are like also small actors, do they have disadvantages and things like this. And then we have also the ecological dimension, and there we defined energy consumption, CO2 emissions, embodied and shared resource consumption of hardware infrastructure, and also a little bit the relation to the usage of this technology. So what are the sustainability potentials in use and applications? So is this is this something which is used to enhance sustainability, like, for example, recommendation of sustainable products or whatever, or is it something used to which like may also impede sustainability, like, for example, exploiting new oil fields or something like this. And then we have also the cross-cutting governance indicators. I mean, I think they're also well known and also embedded in various frameworks. Is there a code of conduct in place? Is there stakeholder participation, a documentation, a risk management? Are there defined responsibilities? Or is there a complaint mechanism? And when we take a little bit deeper look at the criteria, I also wanted to briefly show you how we operationalize them. For example, when it comes to discrimination and fairness, we thought about, okay, what can be indicators from which we can see if those criteria are fulfilled. And for discrimination and fairness, these can be, for example, the assessment of potential for discrimination, or the usage of methods for measuring fairness, the definition of vulnerable groups, or are there any measures to eliminate discrimination? For embodied and shared resource, it's, for example, is the hardware certified or the data center? Are there any efficiency metrics? And also this like hardware recycling rate or hardware use rate. This could be possible indicators which can like show us if this criteria is fulfilled. And for example, when it comes to the economic criteria, market diversity and exploitation of innovation potential, we defined indicators like accessibility of code, accessibility of data, also accessibility of AI tools and interfaces. So are there any APIs? So where we can also where all other actors can also use different kind of models or solutions, and also the question of multi-homing and compatibility. So how are they like compatible to each other? And there are also some ideas, and there's, I think, a very interesting paper on what could be approaches to responsible design patterns. I mean, I will not go into detail too much, but some aspects, for example, could be like promote data sparseness and data collection so that you only really collect the data you need. And also like try to make sure that you curate the data in a good way and things like this. And also like there are many like technically measures with how you can eliminate inefficiency in model architecture, like pruning, quantization, whatever. I mean, I'm not from this developing field, so I cannot explain what they mean, but there are several measures which you can use in order to improve the efficiency of the model so that it doesn't need that much energy and resources to be run. And obviously, it's also for example, about reporting, monitoring environmental sustainability. But when you look like at the lower parts where it's about social aspects, it's also about like, for example, conducting fairness evaluation and all those issues. So there are several approaches which you can do related to the, let's say, design of the machine learning model. But we can also look at more broad approaches. And when you want to like detect or estimate this impact from the algorithms, there are also many tools you could use, and also some of the cloud providers are having tools from which you can like detect how much energy and CO2 emission is the model that I'm developing or the model that I'm using actually emitting. And when it comes to the more broad approaches or strategies, I think one important aspect, and I also mentioned it a bit before, is like the decarbonization of digital infrastructures, especially when it comes to the energy supply, so that we also try to make use of renewable energy as much as possible. But it's obviously also like about decreasing the amount of energy we use because it's also a land use issue with more new renewable energy plants. So I think it's also a bit problematic to say, okay, we can only switch to renewable energy and then everything is solved. Because, for example, when it comes to the water issue, that also won't be solved with renewable energy. But this is a strategy to decrease the carbon footprint, let's say. Then I think a very interesting approach when it comes to the like what can developers or companies or startups which are developing those LLMs do. For example, they can try to fill out a model card where there are many aspects integrated into this, and there's also like at the web page of Hugging Face, there's also a very easy tool to integrate this into your workflow, let's say. And I mean, we could also discuss if the discussion about open AI models should be put more at the center, because it would also be good to not like use pre-trained models and share models and everything, because this would also mean maybe reducing the environmental impact. And we would also argue for like that we have to do more sustainability impact assessment and also more mandatory reporting. And that is also what like the civil society, especially in Europe, is demanding. like at the AI summit, which we had, AI Action Summit, which we had this year in France, there was a joint statement from civil society, and they had several demands what we should do in order to decrease this impacts that AI had, like phase out fossil fuels, curb the AI expansion, also like be more responsibility in the supply chain, and have strict environmental human rights standards. And also this issue of like equitable participation and communication. How are like those people who are affected really participating? And also the thing which I mentioned in the last slide about transparency. So that like it has really to be disclosed what are the environmental impacts related to water, energy, raw material, and all this stuff. So that we really know what's going on there. So as you can see, it's not only a topic which is like discussed in the let's say academic sphere, but it's also getting more and more widely recognized. And especially when it comes to Europe, the civil society organizations are also trying to like build coalitions and work upon this topic. Because we are at the moment recognizing that it gets even more pressing. Yeah, and I'm really also happy to hear the perspective from your country and from Professor Srivastava. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to yeah, hear about your thoughts later.
Thank you, Dr. Rohde. That was a really impactful presentation, I must say. You covered a lot from what we should like see as sustainability, not sustainability, just broaden our aspects going into the conversation. And then I think I'll pick up a paper and go through your framework with more detail, because it looks really interesting with the whole cross-cutting aspects that you have interwoven into it for impact. I may have a question for you on that later. But before that, I'll ask Dr. Srivastava to please give us her discussant remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Shiva, for giving me the opportunity. And thank you, Dr. Rohde. I think this was a very, very relevant work that you have done. And I have gone through your paper in detail on the framework that you have done. And specifically, I think I find something very valuable in your work, and which is your socio-technical ecological model that you have presented. And it kind of actually forces us to look beyond just the algorithm part, I think. And, the entire life cycle of these systems, your work actually presents that part. And I think this is the need of the hour today in terms of actually presenting the entire life cycle. And this is how we should look at things in perspective. So basically, you have covered most of the points. And just to build on your criteria of ecological and your social dimension that you were talking about, I would just take a few minutes to also highlight one very important part, which is the physical hardware layer. And this part is that we can no longer talk about AI as just like, as a cloud thing or something, but it has become a sort of reality, and which is very, very heavily, I think it is grounded in heavy industries. Okay. And these heavy industries are reliant on massive physical extraction. Okay. And so two points I want to briefly touch upon, and which is first is the upstream supply chain. And second point you have already covered in detail, so I won't go in detail. That is the operational environmental burden. So just to elaborate a bit on my point, what I want to say is over here is that actually the hardwares that actually power our AI systems or our AI models, and especially when it comes to very high performance GPUs. Okay, so all of this is we heavily rely on critical elements. For example, we rely on cobalt, we rely on lithium, we rely on so many rare earth elements. Okay? And all of the extraction of these material. So it kind of leaves a mark on a landscape, and we definitely go into a challenge of deforestation and soil contamination. So this is one thing that I want to point out. And of course, just like I pointed out that this supply chain that we have for critical minerals like copper, lithium, cobalt, this is a global supply chain. And this is a global issue that we are facing today because every country requires these minerals, these elements, they require it. Just to build on this, that every country does require all of this, I think it won't be wrong to say that AI is currently the largest infrastructure project in the world. And in fact, the generative AI that you talk about, it does require vast amount of energy. It does require vast amount of water, which you already pointed out in detail. On the other aspect, if we just talk about in terms of supply chain, also one very important thing that you pointed out was the social and human right risk. Okay, so like we can see on the social side today also, for example, if we take just the example of countries like Congo, just if I just talk about the cobalt mining part, okay. Now, I was reading one of the report that how cobalt mining is actually linked to hazardous working conditions. And this is where your point of fair wages and working conditions comes up. So this is one point that we need to actually highlight, and your work rightly points out on that also. And two more points that in terms of supply chain that I want to point out over here is that one is that today the role of frameworks becomes very important. For example, today, like for example, that we are having due diligence guidelines by OECD, or something like if you must have heard that we have initiative for responsible mining. So initiatives like these are, I think, today very, very essential. And we need to have that kind of audit. We need to have that kind of diligence, which again, like you pointed out, leads to transparency, which is the need of the hour today. And also we need a kind of, which I feel is that we need a regulatory shift also. Like, for example, that there's a policy in European Union of critical raw material act. I think that is the act which in European Union, there is an act which is called as the European Union Critical Raw Material Act, and which kind of mandates that by 2030, the European Union must recycle at least 15% of its annual consumption of raw materials. So these are some things which is required currently. So just taking the cue from Europe, I think other countries can follow similarly. Like for example, India is also working in terms of green AI a lot. Like we have so many initiatives today in India. And these are not just initiatives just for namesake. For example, when we talk about green AI initiative that we have in India, or if we talk about the semiconductor manufacturing mission that we are having in India, so they kind of bring forward a point that that we need to make a country reliant in terms of using these materials, because otherwise it's just the power is concentrated in a few countries. So I think this is what is currently required by countries. So India is also working in that direction through missions like Viksit Bharat, through missions like Green AI, semiconductor manufacturing mission. So this is largely the point that I wanted to mention. Second point that I want to mention in terms of environmental burden, and I think you have very elaborately covered all the points of energy intensity. And I was going through one of the reports, and I just found out this, and you can correct me, and this is the data which it was like very surprising for me. And I'll just tell you the data, and it said that a standard server consumes 7 to 10 kilowatt of power. And in contrast, an AI-ready rack with specialized GPUs, they can demand actually 30 to over 100 kilowatt. So the kind of energy intensity that we use in terms of generative AI, that's enormous. And again, a single NVIDIA H100 GPU, it can consume somewhere around like 700 watts, which is way higher than the traditional CPUs. So this is something which I read recently. And of course, like you pointed out, in terms of water footprint also, in terms of cooling of data centers also, we require so much of water consumption. And I was just reading the other day data, and it said that the semiconductor manufacturing processes for advanced AI, it requires so much amount of like water, and the estimate suggested that the one generative AI query can actually consume somewhere around like 500 millimeters of water for every 20 to 50 chat prompts. So which data is like, which came as a shock to me, like such a huge amount of water footprint is that we are using currently. And even the simple things like lithium extraction, that is so water intensive. Okay, while the traditional brine evaporation method, it used hundreds of gallons of water per ton of lithium. So, and the lithium extraction that we are also having in countries like Chile, and we are having in drier regions. Okay, and in these drier regions, the excessive water usage, it has kind of, led to severe water shortages also. It has led to threatened ecosystems also. And it has also impacted the indigenous communities also. So, so in a way, we are covering all the points. We're covering the ecological aspects also. We're covering the economic aspects also, the human aspect also, the social aspect also. So this is what is entirely happening today. And just to already you have elaborately covered the e-waste challenge. I'll not cover that, but there were a few case studies which I came across. For example, the Atacama Desert, Chile case study that I came across, how, in barren landscape, complex habitats are there and they're being affected. We are also facing the issue of deep sea mining also now. So in these terms also, a huge environmental burden, I think, is being is happening today. And so just to conclude everything and to bring all my points together, I think today we need certain solutions. And I think one thing that we definitely need is that we need to have a coordination between countries rather than like competing with each other. I think we need a sort of collaboration and coordination so that, we can retain the better value of everything. Second thing, which I think in terms of solution, is that I think we need to connect our technology workers, for example, your developers, your coders, with supply chain workers also, like your miners, your factory workers, so that we can, kind of build a solidarity. So this is the second point that I think that uh, might help. And just to just to end my discussion, I think there are two questions that we need to ask very, very importantly. And one is that do we need to slow down, or can we afford to slow down? And thing is that actually who is this for, and who is actually bearing the cost of all of it, human and environmental cost, and is it actually worth it? I think this is what I want to bring everything together. So yeah, so these were the few points that I wanted to discuss.
Thank you, Dr. Srivastava. That was a really powerful ending there. Yeah. You actually brought up a really good point about the global supply chain and how all of these things are again interconnected, and the impact is borne very on a very disproportionate level, so to say, by people who already may be or are more likely to be at a disadvantage. And I I really loved your ending, by the way. That's something that really resonated with me. Then I'd also now like to move to the question and answer session of this webinar. So first, I'd like to ask if the panelists have any questions for each other, or whether they have any pointers or comments on what we had just discussed. And meanwhile, anybody from the audience can leave their questions in the chat, and I'll communicate the same to the panelists. And yeah, go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you also for this very nice and interesting and also elaborated discussion. What I would be interested in, if you know any cases like in India or in your country where there are conflicts about, like for example, water usage, And what I also would be interested in, because you also mentioned the topic, and I think that's also a topic which is not that much discussed at the moment, about deforestation. Like, do you know any cases where there is where that is the case, or do you know like in which location this is especially occurring? That would also be very interesting for me. And for me, it would also be interesting, but I don't want to ask too much questions. It would also be interesting, like, what is the relationship between, let's say, the local communities and also the, let's say, local administrative actors or local political actors? Because I think that's also sometimes a tension between like what the local communities want to achieve and maybe what like local, let's say, politicians or whatever want to achieve, because they are also arguing for like economic competitiveness or something like this. So that would be also interesting if you have like some insights on those issues in your, like, which you know from your cases in your country, for example.
Thank you, Dr. Rohde. Just to answer your first question, in terms of deforestation, I think deforestation has become a global problem. I think it's not specific to a country. But if I just take the example of my country, of course, my country is also, uh, I like to call it as a crisis, because it's going on at such a large scale that in order to for mining purposes, for any purposes, the deforestation is happening at such a large scale. For example, I worked in remote areas of India in a state of Maharashtra, and there's a biodiversity hotspot which is called as Western Ghats. So there, the biodiversity it's a very richly biodiversity area. So in that area also, a lot of mining activities used to take place, and due to which we lost a lot of biodiversity. And if you look at the images of that area before 10 years, and if you look at the images of that area presently, there's a huge difference. And we cannot even imagine in terms of the biodiversity that we had, the rare biodiversity that we had in that area, that we lost. And so just in terms of extraction and just due to mining, of course, after that, when the things go wrong, then a lot of initiatives start, which is a global problem. Of course, it's not specific to my country, but it's a global problem. Then, of course, a lot of initiatives. Now, we are also taking a lot of initiative. Like, for example, that we have started few models where we are kind of maintaining the biodiversity, also giving livelihood to people also. So we're kind of developing that model where the biodiversity, livelihood goes hand in hand, so that one does not impact the other. So this is to your first question. And to the second question, yes, I agree that local people and the governments, they sometimes do have clashes because of varied interest. And sometimes it's not like completely one is not against the other. Sometimes it's more about the perspective also, because sometimes the government is looking at it from a larger perspective, and while a local population might be just looking through a perspective of just the livelihood also. So I think the conflict happens in that area also. So yeah, I think I'll not go deeper into that part, but yeah, of course, conflicts do occur, and that's the thing that we need to tackle.
Thank you very much.
Okay, it seems like we have a question in the chat, and geopolitics has made its entrance. Yeah, it says, given India's position with US and China respectively on the tariff changes, how does the rare earth agreement between US and China affect India and its position in the global AI spectrum? The person who asked the question is referring to the meeting that happened 2 weeks ago in South Korea.
Even India's position.
I think it's basically talking about the rare earth agreement that they just recently reached, which is more or less a truce, for a lack of a better word, where China is supposed to suspend export controls on rare earths and issue general licenses for their exports to the US, which is why I said geopolitics has entered the chat.
Dr. Rohde, if you want to take it, because I think I'll have to read the agreement again that happened 2 weeks ago in South Korea. So I'll have to go through the agreements between US and China in that sense.
I think I'm also not that deep into this like topic so that I can answer the question. I'm really sorry. But I mean, there are also so many political developments and everything, so that, yeah, it's not simply not possible to follow everything.
Yeah, lots of intersectionalities. I think it also, the intent may be to sort of, because we did talk about the global supply chain. So basically, because I think there's, as far as my limited knowledge on this topic goes, there's a bottleneck for processing of a particular rare earth mineral in China. So I think that was something, and because of trade tensions, there was a lot of worry about how that will affect the US, because China is basically in control of around over 90% of the processing and refining of that particular rare earth material. But yeah, it's also very, like, if you go very deep into geopolitics of rare earths, then I think you'll find something like this. But I actually did have a question for both of you. So given that, Dr. Rohde, that you talked about your framework, and Dr. Srivastava, you also presented us with a bunch of solutions that we can have to sort of integrate AI and sustainability and a broader perspective, and how we can go about thinking about it. What do you think are the best, or not the best, but what do you think are effective ways in which we can go about sort of integrating something like this in our policies? Okay, whether, like, I know Dr. Srivastava talked a bit about the requirement of international cooperation, but if you talk about the local and the domestic level, what do you think can be effective methods to sort of integrate it, even if we begin with baby steps?
What I think, I think when it comes to the local level, the most effective way, at least to my perspective, would be to have like very strict, let's say, environmental standards and reporting standards and stuff like this for data centers. So that, for example, if you choose the location to build a data center, you have to make an environmental impact assessment. And if you see that, like, for example, it's a dry region, then you have to revise your decision and maybe go to another location or something like this. Or if like I think like this especially applies when you like are constructing data centers, because there are also many data centers planned. I think that is a very important issue, that you have like strong, let's say, environmental regulation on the, let's say, on the data center itself. And for example, that you also have like kind of mandatory reporting of all those, like, let's say, indicators, power usage effectiveness, water usage effectiveness, and stuff like this. And I think that's very important. And I think, like, for example, in Germany and also partly in Europe, they're also trying to establish this a bit. In Germany, you have this like energy efficiency directive where they are really where data center owners are really should really mandatory report certain stuff, and also like that you, for example, should locate the data center where you could make use of the waste heat, because there's also much waste heat created in those data centers. And since in winter it's very cold in Germany, you can also make good use of the heat. So I think like this whole issue of the decision on the location, how to use the waste heat, like what to report, and in which areas you build the data center. I think on this issue, I think it's a very good path to do, like to have a good environmental standard and environmental regulation on this. And yeah, and I think, that also relates a bit to the question from the audience. I think this issue, which you mentioned, Professor Srivastava, is also very important, like the coordination of countries, that they are not competing, because that is not what we are seeing at the moment. In the European Union, we are doing the regulation on the European level. Although we are like importing, let's say, the resources, the mining and everything, that's also a bit of like shifting the burden to other countries. And I see this also really as a big challenge. How can we do, like, for example, coordinated kind of regulation for this global issues? Yeah, so and that's why I don't know. I mean, I think in when it comes to this topic, the supply chain law is also very important, like to also have stricter regulations in the supply chains. Yeah, and we also have seen with the AI Act at the European Union that they also incorporated a bit this issue of like energy consumption and stuff of model training. So they also incorporated this a bit, but not that much. I mean, it's not about energy, it's not about resources, it's not about like all the hardware related stuff. But yes, I think these are some yeah leverage points which we can try to focus on.
So I think I completely agree with Dr. Rohde that we do need stricter environmental standards without a doubt. We do need that. But at the same time, I also feel I think the way that we are continuously building new models right now, new giant models right now, continuously what we are doing right now, I think instead of that, I think if we just like focus on the part of just fine tuning our applications, I think that would be far less energy intensive than building again new models, new giant models. So this is one thing that I want to focus on. Secondly, I think awareness and training. I think second point that I want to mention that is also very much required today on how responsible sourcing, how responsibly we can use AI, and like in your work also, Dr. Rohde, that you mentioned that rather than AI for sustainability, sustainable AI. So I think for that we do require awareness and proper training and proper skill imparting programs. And in terms of how India is doing, I think India is right now accelerating its green transition, and like recently we did have climate and we hosted a convention on that. It was a virtual convention on climate change and AI, and global partnership on AI, artificial intelligence. So India is aware of like how we can move towards sustainable AI, and we're kind of now we're thinking in those directions also, because we ultimately also have to, we have set our targets of net zero and all of that. So we are focusing on renewable sector also, and we have achieved a lot in terms of that also, in terms of just bringing in renewable sector, which again we need to do more, but we are walking in that direction. And in terms of international level, I think we also need something just like we did have a Paris Agreement where we had for everybody common but differentiated responsibility and respective capacities. In terms of AI also, I think we should bring in something on those lines as well, that where all the countries can work on those lines, and we can set targets for the countries at an international levels, and the countries can accordingly build their policy in terms of achieving that. So this is what I feel that in terms of coordination, how countries can act towards it.
Thank you, both of you. That was actually very detailed and poignant response that to my question. I actually really like the small like tidbit and example you gave, Dr. Rohde, of the usage of waste heat. It talks a bit about how we can sort of we need a bit of innovative thinking to and sort of apply a bit of those non-conventional solutions to sort of think about to process all of these in a more sustainable angle, and also sort of processing and including these aspects in our like from local in our policies from the local level onwards. But I'd also like to point a small thing out here that I think was present in the undercurrents of what Dr. Srivastava said, but I want to make it a bit more overt, is that when we talk about countries like India, where developing countries are also sort of rushing to not be left, for a lack of better word, right, not be left behind in the AI race. It's a much more precarious balance for them to strike between, oh, we want to promote innovation in this particular emerging sector, or we miss the bus, versus, like in our environments are important, because Dr. Srivastava is right. We've been doing independently a lot of work in the environment and sustainability sector, in the sense, so there's been a huge push nationwide on the solar program, the use of solar and renewable energy. There's been a whole push for electronic vehicles and things like that. For uptake of these solutions on a broader scale in the daily level has been, they've really been working hard towards it. But yeah, I think it will be hard to strike this balance between we need to support sort of resource building, capacity building in our own nation for this emerging technology, which everyone says are going to be super important for what comes next, and trying to be sustainable about it. It's going to be a real challenge, but I think if we do employ these solutions that we talked about, we will, I'm hopeful. But that's what I'm going to say. So I'd like to, so we just have 4 minutes remaining. So if the panelists have any quick remarks for the end, just 2 minutes each, and then we can conclude.
Should I start? Yeah. Yeah. I think this issue that you mentioned, I think that's maybe one of the most important issues. I mean, how do we deal with this conflict between being competitive and also like using this technology and also using this technology like for good? I mean, there are many good ways, applications for which like you can use the technology for the common good or for like also like dealing with environmental harms and climate issues, and the like ever raising impacts we see that these technologies have. And I think like to trying to navigate a bit between like what we can do at the local level, what can be what can be impactful strategies at the local level regarding to regulation, but maybe also regarding to empowering local groups to deal with those issues, and let's say the more global level on how to like do coordination between countries and also maybe try to align more the regulatory frameworks in different countries. I think that's very important questions, which I think we also have to work on in the next years, because I mean we all know that that we only have this one planet, and we cannot use cannot try to like use resource for everything we want to use. I mean, we also maybe have to decide what is the most important technologies we really need as a society. Yeah, I think that's my final remark.
Shiva, just to sum it up, one point that I want to add to Dr. Rohde, that I think we also need that to do more research in this area. So even though we are doing research in terms of developing AI, definitely there's a lot of research being done in that area. I think we need research in terms of environment, economic, and the social dimension as well. And in terms of that, I think Dr. Rohde has done a very relevant research, and we need more of these research, and so that we can actually mitigate the risk that we are continuously having in terms of supply chain of AI, or any for that matter, any risk. We need more research. So in terms of collaborating between countries in doing that research and putting forward the perspective of respective nations, I think this is one point that I want to really focus on. We need this kind of coordination in terms of research and development also. So this is, yeah.
That's a pretty good sort of solution on how we can work, actionable solution on how we can work towards mitigating these things, fund more research. I like that. Okay. Thank you so much for giving us your time, Dr. Rohde, Dr. Srivastava. It was a wonderful discussion. I think I learned a lot, and I'd like to think that the people who were attending also did learn a lot. And we hope to stay in touch, and I hope that what these discussions will have some sort of impact on what we discuss and what the outcomes come out of the impacts of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shiva, for giving us the opportunity. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Rohde.
Thank you very much. It was a really nice and interesting conversation.